The morning began the way most of Tiana Wells' mornings did. Too early, too fast, and already slipping out of control before she had the chance to catch up. The alarm had gone off at 6:00 am. She'd been awake long before that, staring at the cracked ceiling above her bed, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside and the soft breathing of her son curled beside her. There was always a moment like this, just before the chaos began, where everything felt still. It was the only time she allowed herself to breathe without thinking about bills, lines, or the quiet fear that one mistake could cost her everything. But stillness didn't last long in her world. By 60:32, she was already rushing, her hair pulled into a loose bun that refused to stay in place. One hand trying to button her blouse, while the other reached for a piece of toast that had slightly burned at the edges. Tiny apartment felt even smaller in the mornings, filled with the scattered remains of yesterday. Liam's toys, a half-folded laundry basket, a single sock that had somehow made its way onto the kitchen counter. "Mommy," a sleepy voice called from the bedroom doorway. Tiana turned, forcing a smile that masked the exhaustion in her eyes. Liam stood there, his small frame wrapped in oversized pajamas, his curls messy from sleep, his eyes still heavy, but curious as ever. "Good morning, baby," she said softly, kneeling down to his level. He rubbed his eyes and looked up at her. "Are you going to work again today?" The question hit her harder than it should have. She swallowed gently and nodded. "I have to, sweetheart. It's just for a little while." He nodded like he understood more than he should at 5 years old. That was the thing about Liam. He didn't complain much. He didn't throw tantrums or demand things she couldn't give him. Instead, he adapted, quietly, patiently, like he already knew life wasn't going to be easy, and that both comforted and broke her heart at the same time. By 7:10, everything had unraveled. The babysitter cancelled. Not with warning. Not with time to adjust, just a voicemail filled with apologies and excuses that Tiana didn't have the luxury to argue with. She stood in the middle of her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, listening to the message again as if it might somehow change the second time. It didn't. Her chest tightened as reality set in. She couldn't miss work. Not today. Not when her supervisor had already warned her about punctuality. Not when she was finally being considered for a permanent position. Not when everything she had worked for was balancing on something as fragile as showing up on time. She looked down at Liam, who was now sitting on the floor, lining up his toy cars in a neat row, completely unaware that their entire day had just shifted, and in that moment, she made a decision. "You're coming with me," she said quietly. Liam looked up, his face lighting up instantly. "To your work?" "Just for a little while," she added quickly. "You have to be very good, okay?" He jumped to his feet, excitement replacing the last traces of sleep. "I'll be the best helper ever." She smiled, but there was tension behind it, 'cause she knew something he didn't. Grayson Tech was not the kind of place where you brought your child. It was the kind of place where perfection wasn't expected. It was demanded. The subway ride felt longer than usual, crowded, loud, unforgiving. Tiana held Liam close, one arm wrapped around him protectively as strangers brushed past them without a second glance. Her mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Being seen, being reported, being called into her supervisor's office. "Losing everything, Mummy," Liam whispered, tugging gently at her sleeve. "Is your boss nice?" She hesitated. "I don't really know him," she admitted. That wasn't entirely true. Everyone knew of Andrew Grayson, the CEO, the man whose name was spoken in hushed tones in hallways. The man who rarely appeared, but when he did, the entire building seemed to shift around him. Power had a presence, and his was impossible to ignore. By the time they reached the building, Tiana's nerves were already stretched thin. The lobby was exactly as she remembered. Cold, Polished, intimidating. Marble floors that reflected every step. Glass walls that made everything feel exposed. Who looked like they belonged there. She didn't. Not really. And bringing Liam only made that feeling stronger. "Stay close to me," she whispered, tightening her grip on his hand. They passed security with a quick nod, her heart pounding louder with every step toward the elevators. Every second felt like a risk. Every glance felt like judgment. Somehow, she made it to the employee clinic without being stopped. And when the nurse agreed to watch Liam for a few hours, relief hit her so suddenly it almost made her dizzy. "Just until lunch," the nurse warned. "Of course," Tiana said quickly. She knelt in front of Liam, smoothing his hair. "Be good, okay?" "I will," he promised. And for a moment, she believed him. For 3 hours she worked like her future depended on it. Because it did. She moved quickly, efficiently, barely looking up from her tasks, trying to make herself invisible in a place where invisibility felt impossible. But even as she worked, part of her mind stayed elsewhere, with Liam. When the clock finally hit noon, she didn't hesitate. She rushed back to the clinic, her heels clicking against the floor, her heart racing with urgency. "Ready for lunch?" she asked, forcing brightness into her voice, grinned. "Can we take the fancy elevator?" She laughed softly. "Sure." It was a small decision, a harmless one. Or at least, it should have been. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a quiet hallway that felt different. Too quiet, too important. Tiana's stomach dropped the moment she saw the sign. Executive floor, and before she could react, Liam ran. "Liam!" she called, panic rising instantly. But he didn't stop. He moved with a strange kind of certainty, his small feet carrying him down the hallway, as if he already knew where he was going. And that was what scared her most, because this wasn't curiosity. This was something else. By the time she reached him, it was already too late. The door was open, the office was massive, and inside, standing behind a desk that looked like it belonged in a magazine, was Andrew Grayson. Time seemed to freeze. Tiana's breath caught in her throat as she stepped into the doorway, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Liam walked straight up to the man, without hesitation, without fear, and wrapped his arms around him. "Daddy," he said. The word didn't just echo. It shattered something in the room. Andrew Grayson didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. For a man who controlled everything around him, this moment had taken that control away completely. Tiana felt her entire world tilt beneath her feet. "I'm so sorry," she rushed out, her voice trembling as she stepped forward, reaching for Liam. But he didn't let go right away. Like he belonged there, like he had found something he didn't even know he was missing. Andrew finally looked up. When his eyes met hers, something shifted. Not confusion, not anger, something deeper, something that felt like recognition. And in that moment, Tiana realized this wasn't just a mistake. This was the beginning of something she didn't understand yet. Something bigger than her. Bigger than him, bigger than either of them were ready for. And somehow, it had all started with a hug. Andrew didn't pull away. That was the first thing Tiana noticed, even through the chaos flooding her mind. Most people would have reacted instantly, stepped back, corrected the child, created distance. But Andrew Grayson stood still, his arms slightly raised at his sides, as if unsure what to do with them. His eyes fixed on the boy holding on to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Daddy," Liam repeated softly, pressing his cheek against the fabric of Andrew's suit. The word landed differently the second time. Heavier. More real. Tiana's pulse roared in her ears. She stepped forward quickly, forcing her hands to remain steady as she gently tried to pull Liam back. "Sweetheart, no. This isn't." Her voice faltered, the words refusing to form properly. "You can't just." But Liam resisted for a moment, tightening his grip, as if letting go would mean losing something important. Andrew slowly lowered his gaze to the child, something unreadable passing through his expression. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't discomfort. It was something far more unsettling, something quiet and searching. "What's your name?" Andrew asked, his voice calm but softer than Tiana expected. "Liam," the boy answered without hesitation, finally loosening his hold but still standing close, looking up at him with open certainty. Andrew nodded slightly, repeating the name under his breath like it meant something. "Liam." Tiana swallowed, forcing herself to step fully into the room now. "I am so sorry, Mr. Grayson. This was a mistake. He doesn't know what he's saying." But even as she said it, the words didn't feel convincing. Because Liam looked like he knew exactly what he was saying. Andrew's eyes shifted back to her, studying her more closely now. "You work here?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said quickly. "Internal operations. I had an issue with childcare today, and I thought I could manage it without." "It's fine," he interrupted gently. The calmness in his tone caught her off guard. Most people in his position would have been irritated. At the very least, inconvenienced. Andrew didn't look either. If anything, he seemed distracted. By Liam. "He called me Dad," Andrew said, almost to himself. Tiana let out a nervous breath. "He's 5. He says things sometimes." "I don't just say things," Liam interrupted, his small voice firm. Both adults froze. Andrew looked down at him again, something in his gaze sharpening slightly. "Then why did you call me that?" Liam shrugged like the answer was obvious. "Because you are." The room went silent. Tiana felt her throat tighten. "Liam, that's enough. We need to go." But Andrew didn't move. He didn't dismiss them. He didn't correct the child. Instead, he crouched down slowly, bringing himself to Liam's eye level. "Do you remember me?" he asked carefully. Liam nodded. Tiana's heart skipped. "No, he doesn't. He's never." "I do," Liam insisted, looking directly at Andrew. "I see you." Andrew's brow furrowed slightly. "Where?" Liam pointed upward. "In my dreams, and sometimes when I'm awake. You're always there." Tiana felt a chill run down her spine. "That's imagination," she said quickly, her voice tighter now. "He has a very active imagination." But Andrew didn't look convinced. He studied Liam for another moment, then slowly stood again, his attention returning to Tiana. "You said your name is Tiana Wells?" "Yes." There was a pause. He asked quietly, "Are you related to Celeste Wells?" The name hit her like a shockwave. Her breath caught instantly, her entire body going still. "Yes," she said slowly. "She was my sister." Andrew exhaled, the sound barely audible but heavy with something unspoken. And just like that, the air in the room changed. Tiana felt it. Whatever this was, whatever connection had just surfaced, it wasn't random. "Where is she now?" Andrew asked, his voice lower. Tiana's chest tightened. "She passed away 5 years ago." Silence fell again. Andrew looked away briefly, his jaw tightening as if he was processing something far more complex than the words themselves. "I see," he said quietly. Liam, unaware of the weight of the conversation, had wandered toward a shelf, his fingers brushing over the neatly arranged objects. "Did you know her?" Tiana asked cautiously. Andrew didn't answer right away. When he finally looked back at her, was something different in his eyes now. Something deeper. "Yes," he said simply. That one word carried more weight than anything else he could have said. Tiana felt her mind racing, trying to connect pieces she didn't even know existed until now. Her sister. This man, her son. No, that didn't make sense. "I think," Andrew continued slowly, "we need to talk." Her instincts immediately went on edge. "About what?" He glanced at Liam, then back at her, privately. Tiana hesitated. Every part of her wanted to leave, to take Liam and walk out of that office and pretend none of this had happened. She couldn't ignore the feeling settling in her chest. The feeling that something important had just been uncovered, something she needed to understand. "Fine," she said quietly. "But not here." Andrew nodded. "Across the street. There's a cafe, 4 o'clock. She hesitated again, then gave a small nod. "Okay." As she reached for Liam's hand, Andrew spoke once more. "Tiana." She turned. "If what I think is true." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Then today wasn't an accident." Her heart skipped. "What do you mean?" But he didn't answer. And somehow, that silence said more than words ever could. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Tiana couldn't focus. Every task felt mechanical, every conversation distant. Her mind kept replaying the moment in the office. The way Liam had run. The way he had spoken. The way Andrew had looked at him. And most of all, the way he had said her sister's name. By the time 4 o'clock arrived, her nerves were stretched thin. She sat in the cafe, her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched, her eyes fixed on the door. Part of her still wanted to leave. She didn't, because deep down, she already knew. There was no going back. The door opened. Andrew walked in alone. No assistance, no distractions. Just him. And somehow, that made everything feel even more serious. He spotted her immediately and walked over, his expression calm but focused. "Tiana, Mr. Grayson." "Andrew," he corrected. She hesitated, then nodded. "Andrew." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Liam is 5. "Yes." "And your sister died 5 years ago." Her chest tightened. "Yes." He held her gaze. "Was she pregnant when she disappeared from my life?" The question hit like a storm. Tiana's breath caught. "I didn't know who the father was," she said carefully. "She never told me." Andrew's jaw tightened. "I didn't even know she was pregnant," he admitted. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. "Are you saying?" Tiana began, her voice barely above a whisper, "that you think?" "I don't think," he said quietly. He paused. Then added, "I'm almost certain." Her world tilted again. "That's not possible," she said quickly. "I would have known. She would have told me." "Would she?" he asked gently. Tiana froze. Because deep down, she wasn't sure. Her sister had been different toward the end. Quieter. Distant. Like she was carrying something she didn't want to share. She left without explanation. Andrew continued. One day she was there, and the next gone. Tiana looked down at her hands. She showed up at my apartment months later. Pregnant. She didn't say anything about the father. Just that she needed a place to stay. Andrew closed his eyes briefly. "And Lam, I raised him," she said firmly. "He's my son." Andrew nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to take that away from you." But the fear was already there. Sharp. Immediate. If you think you can just walk in and... "I don't," he interrupted softly. "But if he's my son..." He let the sentence hang. Tiana felt her chest tighten. "Then what?" she asked. Andrew looked at her. "Then I've already missed 5 years I can't get back." The weight of that truth settled between them. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Tiana asked the question that had been building in her mind since the office. "How did he know?" Andrew's brow furrowed slightly. "He walked up to me like he recognized me," she continued. "Like he wasn't guessing. Like he knew." Andrew leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "I don't have an answer for that," he admitted. Tiana shook her head slowly. "Has never seen you before." "I made sure of that." "Maybe," Andrew said quietly. "Some connections don't need to be explained." She looked at him, unsure whether to believe that or reject it completely. "I want a test," she said finally. Andrew nodded immediately. "Of course, no assumptions. No guesses. Just facts." Agreed. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "This part." This part could be proven. Or disproven. And maybe then, everything would make sense again. Or fall apart completely. The days that followed felt stretched between two realities. One where everything remained the same, and another where nothing would ever be again. Tiana moved through her routine as she always had, waking early, preparing breakfast, getting Liam ready for daycare, but now every small moment carried a quiet weight beneath it. It was as if an invisible thread had been pulled loose, and she could feel it unraveling, no matter how tightly she tried to hold everything together. Liam, on the other hand, seemed lighter. He asked about Andrew almost every day. Is he coming today? Can we see him again? Do you think he has toys at his house? At first, she tried to redirect him, brushing off his questions with gentle distractions. But children didn't forget things that mattered to them, and something about Andrew had clearly settled deep in Liam's heart. That unsettled her more than anything else. Because she didn't know how to control it, and control was the only thing that had kept their lives stable for so long. 3 days later, the test was scheduled. A private clinic. Discreet. Andrew had arranged everything, but he didn't overstep. He didn't show up unannounced, didn't call excessively, pressure her. Instead, he gave space, showing up only when necessary, speaking only when needed. That restraint made him harder to read, and strangely easier to trust. The morning of the appointment, Tiana dressed Liam carefully, smoothing his shirt more times than necessary, as if neatness could somehow prepare them for what was coming. Are we going somewhere special? Liam asked, looking up at her with curiosity. She forced a small smile. Just a quick visit to a doctor, baby. Am I sick? No, she said quickly, kneeling down. Not at all. It's just a checkup. He accepted the answer easily, as children often did, trusting her without question. That trust pressed heavily against her chest, because she wasn't sure what she was about to bring into his life. The clinic was quiet when they arrived. Andrew was already there. He stood near the reception desk, his posture composed as always. But there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. When he saw them, something softened in his expression. Hey, he said gently. Liam's face lit up instantly. You came! Andrew crouched slightly as Liam ran toward him, catching him with a small laugh. Of course I did. Watched the interaction carefully. It was still new. Still unfamiliar, but it didn't feel forced, and that made it more dangerous. Andrew asked, glancing at her. She nodded. The process itself was simple, quick, almost too quick for something that carried so much weight. A swab, a form, a signature, and just like that, the answer to a question that could change all their lives was sealed in a small envelope they wouldn't receive until the next day. Waiting was the hardest part. That night, Tiana barely slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling again, just like she had days before. But this time, there was no stillness, only uncertainty. Her mind replayed every memory of her sister, Celeste's laughter, her silence near the end, the way she had avoided certain questions, the way she had held Liam as a newborn, like she was both grateful and afraid at the same time. Had she known? Had she been protecting him? Or protecting Tiana? Or protecting herself? There were too many questions, and not enough answers. Morning came too quickly. The envelope arrived just after 10 a.m. It sat on the small kitchen table, untouched, as Tiana stood across from it, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Liam was at daycare. She had chosen that deliberately. This was something she needed to face before involving him. A knock at the door broke the silence. She didn't need to check who it was. When she opened it, Andrew stood there, his expression calm but his eyes searching. You got it, he said. She stepped aside, letting him in without a word. They stood in the kitchen together, the envelope between them like a line neither had crossed yet. Do you want to open it? he asked. Her throat felt dry. You do it. He shook his head slightly. No. This is your call. She stared at the envelope for a long moment, then slowly reached for it. Her fingers felt colder than they should. Paper made a soft tearing sound as she opened it. Loud. Too loud. She unfolded the document carefully, her eyes scanning the words. It only took a second. 1 second for everything to change. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. Andrew watched her closely. She handed him the paper without a word. He took it, his eyes moving quickly across the text. And then he exhaled, a slow breath that seemed to carry years of something unspoken. He's mine, he said quietly. The words settled into the room like truth made solid. Tiana closed her eyes briefly. There it was. No more guessing. No more questioning. Just reality. Yes, she said softly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. There was no dramatic reaction, no raised voices, just the quiet understanding that everything had shifted. Andrew sat down slowly, the paper still in his hands, his gaze unfocused as if he was trying to process 5 years of absence all at once. I missed everything, he murmured. Tiana leaned against the counter, her arms still crossed, holding herself together. You didn't know, she said. That doesn't make it easier. She didn't respond, because she understood that feeling. The weight of things you couldn't change. After a moment, Andrew looked up at her. I want to be in his life. The words were steady, certain. Tiana's chest tightened instantly. Here it was. The part she had been dreading. You can't just, she began. I'm not trying to take him from you, he said quickly. I'm not here to disrupt his life. I want a chance. She studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his tone, no assumption of control, just sincerity, and that made it harder to resist. He's my son, she said firmly. I know, Andrew replied. And you've done an incredible job raising him. I'm not here to replace you. I just want to be present. The word lingered. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. Why? She asked quietly. Andrew looked at her, surprised. Why? You didn't know about him. You've lived your life without him for 5 years. Why does it matter now? Question wasn't accusatory. It was honest. Andrew held her gaze. Because now I do know, he said. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just truth. And that changes everything. Tiana looked away, her mind racing. She thought about Liam, the way he had hugged Andrew, the way he had smiled, the way he had said, Daddy, like it was something he had always known. This wasn't just her decision anymore. Slow, she said finally. Andrew nodded immediately. Slow, no big changes, no overwhelming him. I understand. She hesitated, then added, and consistency. If you come into his life, you stay, no disappearing. Andrew's expression softened slightly. I won't disappear, he said. Something about the way he said it made her believe him, even though part of her didn't want to. When do we tell him? He asked. Tiana took a deep breath. I don't know, she admitted. He's too young to understand everything. I think he already feels it. Andrew nodded slowly. Yeah, he said quietly. I think he does. That afternoon, picked Liam up together. Tiana watched closely as Liam spotted Andrew waiting outside. His reaction was immediate. Pure joy. You came back, Liam shouted, running toward him. Andrew caught him easily, lifting him slightly off the ground. I said I would. Are you staying? Andrew glanced briefly at Tiana before answering. For a while, he said, and somehow answer felt right. Not too much, not too little, just enough. As they walked home together, Tiana stayed a step behind, watching the two of them, watching the way Liam talked non-stop, watching the way Andrew listened. Really listened, like every word mattered, and for the first time since this all began, Tiana felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not resistance, something quieter, something uncertain, but not entirely unwelcome, 'cause no matter how much she tried to control it, this wasn't something she could stop anymore, and maybe she didn't want to. The change didn't happen all at once. It didn't arrive loudly or forcefully, Tiana had feared. Instead, it slipped quietly into their lives, settling into the spaces between routines, filling moments that had once been empty without ever asking permission. Andrew kept his word. He didn't rush things. He didn't overwhelm Liam with sudden appearances or grand gestures. Instead, he showed up in small, consistent ways, the kind that didn't demand attention but earned trust over time. The first week, he came by once. Just for an hour, he brought a simple coloring book and sat on the floor beside Liam, carefully staying within the boundaries Tiana had set. He didn't try to claim anything. Didn't correct Liam when he called him Dad, but didn't encourage it either. He simply responded when spoken to, his presence steady and calm. The second week, it was twice. A short visit after daycare, a walk to the nearby park, ice cream that melted too quickly in the warm afternoon sun, while Liam laughed and tried to catch the drips before they reached his fingers. Tiana watched everything, every glance, every interaction, every word. She expected something to feel wrong, forced, out of place. Didn't. That was what unsettled her the most. Because nothing about this should have felt natural. And yet, it did. Liam adapted quickly. Too quickly. By the third week, he no longer asked if Andrew was coming. He assumed it. "Is Dad picking me up today?" he asked casually one morning, spoon halfway to his mouth. Tiana paused. The words still hit her differently. Still carried weight she hadn't fully processed. "Andrew might stop by," she corrected gently. Liam frowned slightly, as if that answer didn't quite fit. But he didn't argue. He simply nodded and continued eating. Andrew noticed it too, the shift, the comfort, the ease. And instead of pushing it further, he remained careful, measured, respectful. That restraint made Tiana trust him more than anything else could have. But trust didn't erase fear. It only made it quieter. One evening, after Liam had fallen asleep on the couch, the apartment felt unusually still. Andrew sat across from Tiana, a cup of coffee untouched in his hands, his posture relaxed but his gaze thoughtful. "He's incredible," Andrew said softly, glancing toward the sleeping boy. Tiana followed his gaze, her expression softening despite herself. "He is." There was a pause. "He's a lot like her," Andrew added. Tiana's chest tightened slightly. She hadn't heard Celeste's name spoken this often in years. It felt strange, and somehow comforting at the same time. "You knew her well?" she asked quietly. Andrew leaned back slightly, his eyes distant for a moment. "Better than anyone else did," he said. There was something in his tone that made her look at him more closely. "Why didn't she tell you?" she asked. Wasn't accusatory, just searching. Andrew shook his head slowly. "I've been asking myself that every day since I found out." Silence settled between them. "Was it something you did?" she pressed gently. He hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe," he admitted. "Was different back then." "How?" "Focused," he said. "On work. On building something. On proving something to people who probably weren't even paying attention anymore." Tiana watched him carefully. "And her. She wanted something simpler," he said. "Something real. Something I kept telling her we'd get to later." There was a quiet regret in his voice. "And then she left? Just like that?" He nodded. "No explanation. No warning. One day she was there, and the next gone." Tiana looked down at her hands. "That sounds like her," she said softly. Andrew looked at her, surprised. "It does." "She didn't run from things," Tiana explained. "She ran from feelings. If something scared her enough, she didn't face it. She disappeared from it." Andrew absorbed that quietly. "Maybe I scared her," he said after a moment. "Or maybe she was trying to protect something," Tiana replied. He met her eyes. Like what? Both knew. Liam. The air shifted slightly. Not tense, but heavier, more honest. Andrew leaned forward slightly. Do you regret it? What? Letting me into his life. Tiana hesitated. Truth sat on the edge of her thoughts, waiting to be spoken. I don't know yet, she admitted. He nodded. That's fair. Pause. I was scared, she continued. Still am. Off me. Of what this means, she clarified. Of how it changes everything. Andrew glanced toward Liam again. It doesn't have to change everything, he said. It already has, she replied quietly. He didn't argue. Because he knew she was right. The next few weeks passed with a rhythm that felt almost normal. Andrew became part of their routine. Not fully. Not officially. Undeniably. He showed up for school pickups, helped with homework, learned Liam's favorite snacks, his bedtime habits, the way he liked his stories told with exaggerated voices and dramatic pauses. And with every passing day, the bond between them grew stronger, deeper, more real. Tiana couldn't deny it anymore, and that scared her, because the stronger that bond became, the more there was to lose. One afternoon, as she stood in the kitchen watching them play in the living room, something shifted inside her. Andrew was sitting on the floor, building a tower out of blocks while Liam directed him with complete authority. No, not like that. Liam insisted. It has to be taller or it falls. Andrew laughed. You're the boss, huh? I'm the builder, Liam corrected proudly. Tiana smiled softly. There was something about the scene that felt complete. Like a picture she hadn't realized was missing pieces, until now. But with that feeling came something else. Fear. Because nothing in her life had ever stayed complete for long. Later that night, after Andrew had left, Tiana sat on the edge of her bed, her phone in her hands. A message blinked on the screen. Andrew, I know this is a lot. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. She stared at the words for a long moment. Simple. Direct, carried weight. Because promises like that, they mattered, and they also broke. She typed a response, then erased it. Paused, then finally sent, I'm trying to believe that. The reply came quickly. Take your time. I'll prove it. Tiana set her phone down slowly. Her heart felt heavier than it had in days, from something more complicated. Hope. And hope. Hope was dangerous, 'cause it asked you to believe in something you couldn't control. The next morning, Liam woke up earlier than usual, climbing into her bed with quiet excitement. Mommy, he whispered. She blinked awake, her eyes adjusting slowly. What is it, baby? Can Dad come today? The word came so naturally now, so easily. Tiana studied his face for a moment. There was no confusion there, no hesitation, just certainty, and that changed everything. She reached out, brushing his hair back gently. We'll see, she said softly. But as she said it, she already knew the answer. The shift from visiting to belonging didn't happen in one moment. It crept in through routines, through habits, through the quiet repetition of presence. Andrew didn't announce it. He didn't ask for it. He simply kept showing up, again and again, until his absence would have felt more unnatural than his presence ever did. By the time a month had passed, Liam no longer treated Andrew like a guest. He treated him like someone who had always been there. Dad, look, Liam called one afternoon, holding up a drawing with both hands, his face lit with pride. Tiana froze slightly at the sound of the word. She still noticed it every time. Still felt it land in her chest. But she didn't correct it anymore, because correcting it would mean denying something that was clearly real to Liam. And maybe it was real in ways she hadn't fully accepted yet. Andrew leaned down, studying the drawing with genuine focus. That's incredible. What is it? It's us, Liam said, pointing at the figures. That's me, that's Mommy, and that's you. Andrew smiled, but there was something deeper behind it now. Something that looked a lot like gratitude. I like it, he said softly. We look like a team. Liam grinned. We are a team. Tiana looked away quickly, pretending to busy herself in the kitchen. The words lingered. Because part of her wanted to believe that too. That evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Andrew stayed a little longer than usual. They sat across from each other in the quiet living room, the low hum of the city outside filling the silence between them. You're thinking too much, Andrew said gently, breaking the quiet. Tiana let out a small breath. I always do. He studied her for a moment. What is it this time? She hesitated, then decided not to hold back. This feels too easy, she admitted. Andrew frowned slightly. Easy? Yes, she said. Things don't just fall into place like this. Not in real life. He leaned back slightly, considering her words. Maybe they don't fall into place, he said. Maybe we just make space for them. She shook her head. That sounds nice, but it's not how things usually work. Maybe it should be. She looked at him, searching his face. You really believe that? She asked. I believe that not everything has to be complicated to be real, he replied. Tiana let out a soft, almost tired laugh. That's easy for you to say, she said. You didn't spend years trying to hold everything together by yourself. Andrew's expression softened. You're right, he said quietly. I didn't. There was no defensiveness in his tone, no attempt to argue. Just acknowledgement. And I can't pretend to understand what that was like for you, he continued. I can see what you built, and it's strong. She looked down at her hands. I had to be, she said. I know. Silence settled again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Not anymore. I'm not here to take control, Andrew added after a moment. I'm here to fit into what already exists. Tiana glanced at him. That's not how your world works, she said. He smiled faintly. Maybe not. But this isn't my world. She didn't respond right away. Because she realized. He was right. This wasn't his world. It was hers. And somehow, he had stepped into it without trying to change it. That was new. That was different. And it made it harder to push him away. Days turned into weeks. And weeks began to feel like something more permanent. Andrew started leaving things behind, not intentionally. A book here, a jacket there, a coffee mug that slowly became his without anyone ever saying it out loud. Tiana noticed it. Of course she did. She noticed everything. She didn't point it out. Because part of her didn't want to. Because pointing it out would mean acknowledging what was happening, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that yet. One Saturday morning, Liam woke up earlier than usual and climbed into her bed, his small frame warm against her side. Mommy, he whispered. She stirred slightly. Can we all go to the park today? She smiled faintly, still half asleep. We'll see. With Dad, he added. Her eyes opened fully now. There it was again, simple. Unquestioned. She turned slightly to look at him. You really like him, don't you? She asked softly. Liam nodded without hesitation. He's my dad. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Tiana felt something shift in her chest, because no matter how complicated this situation felt to her, to Liam, it wasn't complicated at all. It was simple. It just was. And maybe there was something in that simplicity she needed to learn from. Later that day, they went to the park together. Wasn't anything special, just a normal afternoon. But something about it felt different, lighter. Liam ran ahead, chasing after a ball, his laughter echoing through the open space. Andrew walked beside Tiana, his hands in his pockets, his pace relaxed. You're quiet, he said. She glanced at him. Just thinking. About? She hesitated. Then answered honestly, about how normal this feels. He smiled slightly. Is that a bad thing? I don't know, she admitted. It scares me. He stopped walking, turning to face her. Why? Because normal things can be taken away, she said softly. And when they are, it hurts more than anything else. Andrew studied her for a moment, then said quietly, I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him. There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty, just quiet confidence. And that made her want to believe him, even if she wasn't ready to yet. That evening, after they returned home, Liam fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day. Andrew lingered in the doorway for a moment before leaving. Can I ask you something? He said. Tiana nodded. Are you ever going to let yourself trust this? He asked gently. The question caught her off guard. She looked at him. I don't know, she admitted. He nodded slowly. I'll wait, he said. She blinked. Wait. For you to figure it out, he clarified. There was something about that answer that made her chest tighten. Because he wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding, wasn't expecting. He was just there. And maybe that was exactly what she needed. After he left, Tiana stood in the quiet apartment, her thoughts louder than ever. She walked into Liam's room, watching him sleep, his small face peaceful, his breathing steady. He looked happy, secure, like something in his world had finally settled. And she realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. She stepped back into the living room, her eyes landing on the small things Andrew had left behind. The book, the mug, the jacket draped over the chair, pieces of a life slowly blending into hers. And for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to remove them. Instead, she left them exactly where they were. Because maybe, just maybe, they belonged there. It was a quiet night when everything finally shifted, not in a dramatic way. Not with raised voices or sudden realizations. Just a slow, undeniable change that had been building for weeks, finally settling into something real. Liam had fallen asleep early, worn out from a long day at school and an even longer evening spent laughing at a movie Andrew had insisted was classic. Tiana had stayed in the kitchen longer than necessary, rinsing dishes that were already clean, her mind wandering in circles she couldn't seem to escape. Andrew sat in the living room, the television muted, his attention drifting toward the hallway every now and then, as if making sure Liam was still there, still safe, still part of something he was only just beginning to understand. When Tiana finally stepped into the room, she leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely, studying him for a moment. You're getting used to this, she said quietly. Andrew looked up, smile touching his lips. I think I already am. She stepped further into the room, sitting down across from him. That's what scares me, she admitted. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched her carefully, as if trying to understand something deeper than her words. Talk to me, he said. Tiana exhaled slowly, her gaze dropping to her hands. I spent years building a life where nothing could surprise me like this, she said. Where everything was predictable, controlled. And now, he asked. Now everything feels uncertain, she replied. Like I'm standing on something that could shift at any moment. Andrew leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Or maybe, he said gently, you're standing on something new. She looked up at him. And new things aren't always stable, she said. No, he agreed. But that doesn't mean they're going to fall apart. There was a quiet confidence in his voice that made her pause. You really believe that? She asked. I believe in what I see, he said, and what I see is something that works. Tiana let out a soft breath, shaking her head slightly. It's not that simple, she said. It can be, he replied. She gave a faint, almost tired smile. You're not used to things being complicated, are you? Chuckled softly. You'd be surprised. Then why do you make it sound so easy? Because some things are, he said, would just make them harder than they need to be. Tiana studied him for a long moment. There was something about the way he spoke, steady, certain, without pressure, that made her feel both calmer and more exposed at the same time. I don't know how to do this, she admitted quietly. Andrew's expression softened. You don't have to know everything right now, he said. You just have to take the next step. She frowned slightly. And what is that? He hesitated for a moment, then said, let me stay. The words hung in the air between them, simple, direct, but filled with meaning. Tiana's heart skipped. Stay. Not just visit, he clarified. Not just come and go. I want to be here. Fully. For Liam. For you. Her chest tightened. This was the moment she had been avoiding. The line between temporary and permanent. And once it was crossed, there would be no going back. That's a big step, she said carefully. I know, he replied. And if it doesn't work, she asked. Andrew met her gaze. Then we deal with it, he said. She shook her head. That's not enough. It is for me, he said. Because I'm not going into this expecting it to fail. Tiana stood up, pacing slowly across the room. You can't just move into someone's life like this, she said. There are consequences. Things that change. I'm aware, Andrew replied calmly. Are you? She pressed. Because this isn't your world. This is mine. It's small. It's messy. It doesn't fit into your life the way you're used to things fitting. Andrew stood as well, his expression steady. Then I'll adjust, he said. The simplicity of his answer stopped her. You say that like it's easy, she said. It's not easy, he admitted, but it's worth it. Silence filled the room, heavy, unavoidable. Tiana's thoughts raced, her instincts pulling her in opposite directions. Part of her wanted to protect what she had built, keep things controlled, safe, unchanged. But another part, a quieter part, was tired of doing everything alone, tired of carrying everything by herself. Tired of pretending she didn't need help. She looked at Andrew again, at the man who had shown up, who had stayed, who hadn't tried to take control, but had offered to be part of something instead. Slowly, very slowly, she felt her resistance begin to fade. What would that look like? She asked. Andrew didn't hesitate. It looks like me being here, he said. Every day helping, supporting, being part of the routine, not disrupting it. And Liam. He already sees me as part of his life, Andrew said gently. I don't want to confuse him by being temporary. That hit her harder than anything else he had said. Because it was true. Liam didn't see Andrew as temporary. He never had. And maybe it wasn't fair to treat this like something that could just disappear. Tiana took a deep breath, then nodded. She said softly. Andrew blinked, surprised. Okay, he repeated. She nodded again, more firmly this time. Okay, she said, but slowly. We don't rush this. We figure it out as we go. A small smile spread across his face. Slow works, he said. Relief, that was the first thing she felt. Followed quickly by something else. Something warmer, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. The next morning felt different. Not drastically, but noticeably. Andrew was still there. Standing in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast while Liam sat at the table, offering very serious instructions. No, the toast is too dark, Liam said, shaking his head. Andrew laughed. You're a tough critic. I'm teaching you, Liam replied confidently. Tiana watched from the doorway, her arms loosely folded, her expression soft. This was what staying looked like. Simple, ordinary, real, and somehow it didn't feel as overwhelming as she had expected. Morning, Andrew said, glancing at her. She smiled slightly. Morning. There was a moment of quiet understanding between them. Nothing needed to be said. because everything had already been decided. As they sat down to eat together, Liam looked between them, his eyes bright. "Are you staying forever?" he asked suddenly. Tiana and Andrew exchanged a quick glance. Andrew looked back at Liam. "If that's okay with you," he said. Liam grinned widely.
"It is."
Tiana felt her chest tighten again. But this time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like something settling into place, and maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where they were meant to be for the first few weeks after Andrew began staying over more often. Tiana kept expecting something to go wrong. She expected discomfort to rise where warmth had settled. She expected awkwardness, missteps, some sharp collision between her old life and this new one that had entered it so suddenly. She expected reality to remind her that good things rarely arrived without a cost. The strange thing was that nothing dramatic happened. No hidden storm broke over them. No illusion cracked. Life simply kept moving, and in the moving, it began to shape itself around the three of them. Andrew learned the rhythm of the apartment the way a person learns a song by listening carefully. He learned which floorboard creaked near Liam's room and how to step over it at night. He learned that the kitchen cabinet above the sink stuck when the weather changed, that the shower needed a hard turn to stop dripping, that Tiana liked her coffee strong in the morning and weaker in the evening. He learned that Liam always kicked off one sock while sleeping, and that he only ate strawberries if someone cut the tops off first. None of it seemed too small for Andrew to notice. That was what changed things for Tiana more than anything else. He paid attention, and once she saw that, she began to soften in places she had kept guarded for years. It happened in little ways at first. She stopped tensing every time he offered to help. She let him pack Liam's lunch without checking behind him. She let him handle school, pick up on the days her schedule ran late. She let his clothes stay folded on one side of the chair instead of moving them the moment he left. She let his toothbrush remain beside hers. Then she let herself get used to seeing it there. One Friday evening, rain tapped against the windows while Liam sat on the floor building a fort from couch cushions and old blankets. He had insisted it was not just a fort, but a spaceship. And spaceships, according to him, needed both a captain and a snack manager. Andrew had accepted the role of captain with great seriousness. Tiana had been assigned snack manager, which apparently involved passing grapes through a narrow opening in the blanket wall while obeying invisible space rules. "You can't just hand them in," Liam explained. "There might be aliens." Andrew lowered his voice dramatically. "He's right. We need a security check." Tiana stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the two of them crouched under a sagging blanket roof, and laughed before she could stop herself. It was not a polite laugh or a small tired smile. It was real, open, unexpected. Andrew looked up at the sound of it, and for one brief second something passed between them so quickly. She almost missed it. It was not surprise. It was recognition. As if both of them understood that laughter like that had become rare in her life, and hearing it now meant more than either wanted to say aloud. Later that night, after Liam had finally fallen asleep, in the middle of his spaceship with one hand still wrapped around a plastic dinosaur, Andrew helped her carry him to bed. They moved quietly in the dim apartment, careful not to wake him. Once the covers were tucked around him, and the nightlight glowed softly against the wall, they stepped back into the hallway and closed the door almost all the way. Tiana leaned against the wall and exhaled. "He wore us out." Andrew smiled. "He wore you out. I'm still ready for another mission." She looked at him with a teasing exhaustion she had not realized she missed feeling. "You say that now. Tomorrow he'll have you crawling across the living room, pretending to be a rescue dog." "I've done harder things." "Have you?" He stepped a little closer, the smile still on his face, but his voice gentler now. not many. The quiet stretched between them. It did not feel empty. It felt full, almost fragile. Tiana could hear the rain, and the faint buzz of the refrigerator, and her own heartbeat, suddenly louder than all of it. "You've changed this place," she said before she could stop herself. Andrew's expression shifted. "I hope that's a good thing." She looked toward Liam's door, then back at him. "It is." Something warm moved through his eyes, not triumph, not relief exactly, something deeper. Gratitude, maybe. Care, the kind that had nowhere dramatic to go, because it had already settled into everyday life. He reached up slowly and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. The touch was careful, almost as if he was still asking permission even now. Tiana did not move away. She did not lower her eyes or hide inside some practical excuse. She simply stood there and let the moment find her. Then she whispered, "I'm tired of being afraid of what this means." Andrew's hand remained lightly against her cheek. "Then don't be afraid alone." The words were simple, but they went straight through her. Tiana had spent so many years believing strength meant carrying everything herself that she had forgotten how deeply loneliness can disguise itself as independence. Looking at him now, she realized that what he had offered all along was not rescue. It was partnership, presence, kind of love that did not arrive with grand declarations first, but with repetition, patience, and steadiness until one day you realized it was already holding up part of your life. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was not hesitant, though it was tender. It was not the kiss of strangers stepping into something new, of two people who had already crossed into each other's lives long before their hearts admitted it. Andrew's hand moved to her waist, grounding her there, and for a moment everything that had once felt uncertain seemed to fall into place with astonishing quiet. When they pulled apart, Tiana rested her forehead lightly against his chest and laughed under her breath, almost embarrassed by the emotion pressing against her throat. "What?" Andrew murmured. She shook her head. "Nothing. Just, I didn't think my life would ever look like this." His arms folded around her. "Neither did mine." The months that followed did not turn their lives into a fairy tale. There were still bills and deadlines and school forms and sleepless nights. Liam still got the occasional fever. Tiana still had hard days at work. Andrew still disappeared into long meetings and came home carrying the pressure of decisions that affected hundreds of people. But now those things happened inside a shared life instead of isolated ones. Stress no longer belonged to one person alone. Joy didn't, either. Andrew became the parent who knew exactly where the spare bandages were kept. He became the one Liam asked for when a toy needed batteries or a blanket thought needed engineering support. He became the man standing in the crowd at school events, tall enough for Liam to find instantly. And each time Liam looked for him, he was there. That mattered. It mattered even more than Tiana had expected. One afternoon near the end of spring, Liam's class held a family day picnic in the school courtyard. Parents and guardians arrived balancing folding chairs, paper plates, juice boxes, and too many expectations. Tiana had almost dreaded it, not because of the event itself, because school functions always reminded her of the years she had attended alone, smiling through questions she did not want to answer. This time, though, she walked in with Andrew beside her and Liam bouncing ahead of them, carrying a drawing he insisted on giving to his teacher. There were still glances. Of course there were. Andrew Grayson was not the sort of man who blended into a crowd of tired parents in sneakers and cardigans. He seemed untouched by the attention. He knelt to tie Liam's shoelace without any trace of self-consciousness. He listened carefully as Liam introduced him to a classmate's grandmother as "my dad." He even sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket while children shouted all around them and accepted a paper cup of apple slices with the solemnity of a diplomatic offering. Tiana watched him, and something inside her healed in a place she had not realized was still wounded, not because she needed proof that he cared. She had that already. Because there was something profound about seeing the private truth of him survive in public. He was not performing fatherhood when it was convenient or hidden. He was simply living it. On the walk home, Liam ran a few steps ahead, chasing petals that had fallen from a tree onto the sidewalk. Tiana slipped her hand into Andrew's without thinking. He looked down at her, then smiled softly and tightened his fingers around hers. "You were quiet today," he said. "I was watching," she answered.
For what?
She took a breath. For the difference between someone stepping into a role and someone belonging in it. Andrew was silent for a moment. "And," she smiled. "And you belong." He stopped walking.
So did she.
The city moved around them, passing, traffic humming, wind carrying the smell of rain from somewhere far off. Liam had paused several feet ahead and was talking seriously to a pigeon, as if negotiations were underway. For one moment everything narrowed to the space between Tiana and Andrew. "I love you," he said. There it was. No dramatic pause. No rehearsed perfection, just truth, spoken plainly. Tiana felt tears rise before she could stop them. Not because she was surprised, because a part of her had known it for some time and still needed to hear it said. "I love you too," she answered. Andrew let out a breath that sounded almost like relief, then kissed her right there on the sidewalk while Liam shouted, "Hey, I'm still here," with all the outrage of a child who believes affection should include him at all times. Summer arrived gently after that, warming the city and softening the edges of everything. Their apartment began to feel smaller, not in a bad way, but in the way lives do when they are growing. There were more shoes by the door, more groceries in the fridge, more laughter in the evenings, more future in the rooms. It was Liam who first brought up marriage, not in a grand scene. Not because anyone had explained adult timelines to him. He simply looked up one night while Andrew was reading him a story and asked, "If you're already my dad and you already live here, why aren't you married to Mommy?" Andrew blinked. Tiana, who had been folding laundry in the doorway, nearly dropped a towel. Liam frowned thoughtfully. "That seems slow." Andrew glanced at Tiana, fighting a smile. "Does it?" "Yes," Liam said with absolute confidence. "You should fix it." Liam fell asleep. They laughed about it in the kitchen, but the question lingered. Not as pressure, not as a demand, just as one more truth spoken by the smallest person among them with startling clarity. A week later, Andrew came home earlier than usual. Tiana on the fire escape, just outside the apartment window, watching the sunset burn low between buildings. She liked sitting there when the heat softened and the city looked almost gentle. He stepped out beside her and handed her a mug of tea. "Peace offering," he said. "For what?" "For interrupting your thinking." She smiled and took the mug. "That depends. Is it a good interruption?" "I hope so." He sat beside her in the fading gold light, his shoulder warm against hers. For a moment he said nothing. Then he reached into his pocket and held out a small velvet box. Tiana looked at it, then at him, and felt the whole world go very still. "Andrew," he opened the box. Inside was a ring, elegant and simple, beautiful without trying too hard. "I know life doesn't become real because of a ring," he said. "And I know we already are a family in all the ways that matter. I also know I want every tomorrow I have to belong with you and Liam. Not halfway, not carefully, fully. So if you're ready, marry me." Tiana stared at him through the blur of tears gathering in her eyes. She thought of the rushed mornings, the fear, the loneliness she had once believed would define the rest of her life. She thought of her sister, of the grief they had both carried, of the boy sleeping inside, who had somehow run straight toward the future Before either of them recognized it, she thought of the ordinary miracles that had built this love-packed lunches, hospital chairs, bedtime stories, patience, showing up, staying. Then she smiled through the tears and whispered, yes. When they told Liam the next morning, he threw both arms in the air and shouted like his team had just won a championship. Finally, he announced, now we can all match. Tiana laughed so hard she cried again, and Andrew scooped Liam up, while the boy immediately began making plans for cake, dancing, and a suit with important pockets. In the months that followed, they kept the wedding small, just the way they wanted. No spectacle, no headlines, no performance, only the people who had witnessed the truth of their life together and understood that what they were celebrating had started long before any ceremony would make it official. On the morning of the wedding, Tiana stood by the window fastening a simple pair of earrings while Liam, dressed in a tiny suit and deeply impressed with himself, spun in circles in the middle of the room. Andrew stepped into the doorway, saw them both, and went completely still. Liam grinned. You look like you forgot how to talk. Andrew laughed softly, though his eyes had already filled. Maybe I did. The ceremony itself was quiet and warm and full of the kind of joy that doesn't need decoration. When Andrew took Tiana's hands, his grip was steady. When they spoke their vows, Liam stood between them for part of it, because that was where he insisted he belonged. No one argued. It felt right. And when it was done, when the rings had been exchanged and the promises made public, Liam wrapped himself around both of them at once and said, See, I told you. Years from now, Tiana would remember many things about that day. The light, the laughter, the way Andrew looked at her as if love had become a place he could finally rest. But more than anything, she would remember the strange tenderness of knowing that the life she had once thought was broken beyond repair had not ended. It had only been waiting, quietly, for its missing pieces to find their way home. The weeks after the wedding did not feel like an ending, felt like a beginning that had been quietly unfolding long before anyone gave it a name. Life did not suddenly become perfect, and in a strange way, that made everything more real. The dishes still needed washing. The alarm still rang too early. Liam still lost one shoe every morning like it vanished into another dimension. But now, those small frustrations belonged to all three of them. Tiana noticed the difference most in the quiet moments. Not the big milestones, not the wedding day, not the first time Liam called Andrew Dad in front of others without hesitation, but the small, ordinary spaces where life actually lived. Like the way Andrew would reach for her hand without thinking while passing her in the kitchen. Or the way Liam would fall asleep halfway through a story, his head resting against Andrew's arm, like it had always belonged there. Or the way the apartment, once just a place to survive, now felt like something warmer, something fuller, something alive. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in soft gold, Tiana stood by the window again, the same place where so many thoughts had once circled in uncertainty. Andrew stepped beside her, slipping an arm gently around her waist. You're thinking again, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. I always am. About something good this time. She leaned slightly into him, her gaze drifting toward the street below. Yes, she said softly. About how everything changed. Andrew followed her gaze. That's not always a bad thing. No, she agreed. It's not. There was a pause. Comfortable, easy. And you? She asked. Do you ever think about it? All the time, he admitted. What do you think about? He hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly. I think about how close I came to missing all of this. Her chest tightened slightly at the words. But you didn't, she said. He nodded. No, I didn't. And that was the truth that mattered. Not the years they had lost. Not the questions that would never fully be answered. but the fact that somehow they had found their way here, together. Inside, Liam's laughter echoed from the living room, pulling them both from their thoughts. "Come on!" he called. "You're missing it!" Andrew laughed softly. Sounds important. Everything is to him. They walked back inside together, side by side, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving forward. As they stepped into the living room, Liam looked up at them, his face bright with excitement. "There you are!" he said. "Built something." Andrew crouched beside him. "What is it this time?" "It's a house," Liam said proudly. "For all of us." Tiana felt her breath catch slightly. "A house," she repeated. Liam nodded. "Yeah, not this one. A bigger one, with a yard, maybe a tree." Andrew glanced at Tiana, then back at Liam. "That sounds like a pretty good plan," he said. Liam grinned. "I know." Tiana watched them, her heart full in a way that felt both new and familiar at the same time. 'Cause this was what everything had been leading to. Not perfection, not some ideal version of life, but something real, something steady, something built, piece by piece, through moments like these. She stepped closer, sitting down beside them. "Where would this house be?" she asked. Liam thought for a moment. "Somewhere nice." Andrew laughed. "That narrows it down. And maybe a dog." Tiana raised an eyebrow. "A dog?" "Yeah," Liam said. "We need one." Andrew looked at her amused. "Apparently, we need one." She shook her head, smiling. "We'll see." But even as she said it, she knew they probably would. Because life wasn't something she was holding together anymore. It was something they were building. Later that night, after Liam had fallen asleep, Tiana stood in the hallway for a moment, watching him. He looked peaceful, safe. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. Instead, she felt something else. Something stronger, something steadier. She felt secure. Andrew stepped up beside her, his presence quiet but grounding. "He's happy," he said softly. Tiana nodded. "He is? And you?" She turned to look at him. For a moment, she didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to feel it fully before putting it into words. She smiled. "Yes," she said. "I am." Andrew reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers naturally, and in that simple gesture, there was no uncertainty, no hesitation, no fear, just truth. And as they stood there together, listening to the quiet rhythm of their son's breathing, Tiana realized something she hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't a story about something extraordinary happening. It wasn't about luck, or coincidence, or even fate. It was about something much simpler, something much stronger. It was about people choosing to stay, choosing to show up, choosing to build something together, even when it was easier not to. And sometimes, that was more powerful than anything else, because in the end, it wasn't the moment Liam ran into that office that changed everything. It wasn't even the word, Dad. It was everything that came after. The staying, the choosing, the building, the loving. That was what turned a single moment into a lifetime. And as Tiana leaned into Andrew, her hand still in his, her heart finally at peace, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the one she would choose every single time.